get started here in just a second, waiting for just a few others to join. Okay, I want to just do a quick test here. Gary Cooper, if you can hear me, would you mind raising your hand by hitting the little hand icon? Okay, I'm not seeing Gary do that. Let's try one other. Donnie Martin, if you can hear me, if you would raise your hand by hitting the little hand icon, that would be great. Okay, thank you, Donnie. I appreciate that. Okay, it is 1 o'clock, pretty much straight up. We'll go ahead and get started with this. And I'll put my screen in display mode. Okay, again, this is Matt Logston with Cohesive Information Solutions. I'm joined today by Jeremy Myers, and this is a presentation on Maximo Spatial. It's a product from IBM that runs on top of Maximo and allows you to connect to your GIS system. We had done some of these presentations in the past, focused on kind of the general industry out there, oil and gas, energy and utilities, things like that. And IBM had requested, we're doing this presentation in conjunction with IBM, and this is more of a focus on state and local and federal government application to this, or a presentation focused for that market segment, for public sector. So with that, what we're going to do today is to kind of go through what the Maximo Spatial offering is, and then we'll talk about some options that might be able to allow you to get into the product easier, or evaluate it fitness for use for your particular application. So with that, what I'll do is turn it over to Jeremy Myers. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks everybody for coming. Again, my name is Jeremy Myers, and I'm one of the spatial leads here at Cohesive Information Solutions. What I'm going to talk about today is the product. There's a lot of interest around this product, and we've seen a lot of questions. So it's kind of good to set this up and talk about what it can do. We're going to talk about what is Maximo Spatial and kind of give you a high-level architecture and what makes the product unique from some of the other Maximo GIS integrations that are out there that you may have heard of or seen before. Then I'm going to walk through just some of the basics of how spatial is used and what it looks like from the user perspective. And I'm going to flip over into our demo environment that we have set up and just kind of show you what the tool looks like. Because most of the people invited to this are Maximo users, or coming from a Maximo background, wanted to talk for a little bit about what you can do with your Maximo administration and configuration with the spatial product that you may not have been able to really achieve in the past, and how Maximo Spatial extends the capabilities of Maximo. And then towards the end, we'll talk about a use case. In this case, it would be an electrical use case, but I think seeing it would apply to a lot of different industries and give you some ideas of what you can do with the product. And also, when we have this foundational architecture in place, what are the possibilities of what we could do with the tool, or where you could go with the tool. So that's just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. Let's jump right in and talk to you about what Maximo Spatial is. So the basic understanding, you see a screenshot there of Spatial in action, but Maximo Spatial is an add-on product to Maximo that creates a live link between Maximo EAM and ESRI GIS. It's important to note that there's certain code levels that have to be met because this is going to be a tight integration between the two systems. We'll talk about the code levels a little bit more in a minute, But what I want to stress here is that a lot of other products that are out in the market use a synchronization technique to copy data back and forth between the two systems. What IBM has done, they've taken the approach of having a very tight integration, and so the Maximo application has actually been extended to allow Maximo to directly read tables that live in a GIS database. So you're not the positive there is you're not worried about synchronization queues or getting out of sequence or any lag in seeing updates in the systems. Now the thing that you have to consider is that these systems are going to be tightly coupled together, and so you do have to go through discussions and considerations of, well, where does data really need to live? In the past, I maybe have had to copy data and have duplicate data entries, duplicate attributes in GIS and Maximo. Now I can make smart decisions about where that data appropriately needs to be live and be mastered versus where it only needs to be viewed. Okay? The Maximo Spatial product is intended for organizations whose assets are spread out over large distances. Typically that could be facilities or campus locations or distributed assets like at a utility or municipality. So we're moving outside the four walls of a factory now. Where you really touch and feel Maximo Spatial is the Map tab. You've got your normal Maximo tabs that you would see, and in addition to the normal tabs that you're going to have, you're also going to have a Map tab that shows you the spatial view of your assets. Maximo Spatial out of the box comes with the Map tab will show up in Assets, Locations, Work Orders, and Service Request. Now, we'll see a little bit later, it could be added to some of the other screens in Maximo, but out of the box, that's where it comes. All right. So what's the big deal? So we've tied GIS into our EAM system. And this presentation kind of gets tailored a couple different ways depending on the audience. Since you guys are a Maximo audience, a lot of times it's not a difficult sell to help maintenance people understand how a map can help them out. But a few of the things that we could point out is that we're enhancing Maximo to allow us to see where our assets are and also where work gets done. The spatial product will expose attributes that live in GIS to Maximo for display, use, and editing. Now, the last one is a loaded gun. If you've worked with your GIS departments at your agency, you'll know that they may not be too keen on allowing other people to edit their data, but the good news is that can all be controlled with your standard Maximo security functions. So you can choose if something is editable from Maximo, if a GIS field is editable from Maximo, or if anybody on the Maximo side even sees it. One of the strengths of GIS that is not always apparent to people that have not lived in a GIS world is that GIS is strong in analytics. There's certain analytics that we do with just plain Maximo, but GIS takes it to another level and can let you do analysis based on geography and location. So you can start to ask questions like, let me see the failure codes by a region, or are there problems within a certain proximity of critical assets? These are questions that are easy questions for GIS to answer, but we may not have really been able to answer those effectively with just core Maximo in the past. Now, on the GIS side, one of the benefits that Maximo provides is you have the ability. Maximo is a lot better at archiving and trending data, so your transactional type data really lives more appropriately in Maximo, and Maximo is set up to deal with that. Whereas GIS, it can, but it's not really the best place for the transactional type data. So wanted to point out this slide real quick, again, because we're mainly a Maximo crowd here, just to help you understand GIS and what it does. So what I'm showing here are the way GIS thinks about the world. You see it there at the bottom. I've got my unified version of the real world. GIS will take that and break it up into different layers of data. And these layers, you can think of them as Maximo thinks of objects or tables in a database. But each layer would be a theme and have certain attributes associated with it. So you see there at the top, you've got a work theme, and you've got your customers, and you've got your assets. And these all live on different layers. And there may or may not be an attribute that really relates these layers to each other. But what GIS does is it can relate these disparate layers based on the geography, based on the location of where things are on the world. And so again, here I can now tie together things, or I can bring in outside information such as weather conditions or land use or soil type that maybe I wasn't able to store in a Maximo table before. And I can start to see, am I having problems because of some of these other factors? Okay, where does spatial fit? So this slide and the next I use quite a bit to help people get their bearings on the product and where it lives and what it does. So on the one side, on the left side, I've got Maximo, and I've got my Maximo desktop users connecting to it, and I might have my industry add-ons on there. And then on the right-hand side, I've got my GIS system, and I may have some other GIS add-ons and my GIS desktop users connecting it. The spatial product really sits in between those two enterprise systems, and it allows communication. It provides a platform for communication between those two systems and functionality between those two systems. Now, what a lot of people start to get confused about and start to ask about is when you think about spatial, a lot of times people think about distributed assets and they think about field work. Well, the spatial product itself doesn't necessarily address field work. If I've got a mobile user out in the field, they're still going to be having to connect to Maximo through some mobile Maximo means, whether that be Maximo Mobile or Cyclo or any of the other players out there. And they're still going to be having to get GIS data from their GIS database through database replication or some of the means that ESRI has set up. But in a disconnected state, that mobile user doesn't really interact with spatial. Now, that's not to say that there aren't a lot of people starting to look at this problem, and Cyclo and DataSplice and some of the others are starting to come up with their own integrations. But if I'm in a disconnected state, really spatial sits at the enterprise level, and that mobile user doesn't necessarily see it. Okay. On the next slide, I want to just kind of go into a little bit more detail of what the spatial product is doing and how it's achieving that link. So there's really two data streams of information that spatial connects. On the bottom of the screen, you see I've got a DB link, and so my Maximo database and my GIS database live in just a normal database management system like Oracle, DB2, SQL Server. Okay, and what we're going to do is all of those database systems have a function called a database link that allows me to link the two databases together. So if I'm writing a query from the Maximo database, this database link will act like a pointer, and I can actually reference data that lives over in a remote database that lives outside of my Maximo database, and vice versa. If I'm in GIS, I can write a query to select information from the asset table, even though that asset table doesn't live in GIS, it lives in Maximo. So when we go through the setup process, what we do is we take each of our feature layers. So in the case of water, that could be hydrants, water mains, storm sewers, and I can take those and create a copy of those on the Maximo side. And what the spatial product lets me do is register a copy of that table with the Maximo application. And so now, as a user, when the Maximo application tries to reach out to that table, it knows about hydrants, water mains, storm sewers. Once I've registered it with the application, then I'll relate it to a Maximo object. In this case, we would relate the water mains or the hydrants back to the asset table because we want to treat water mains and hydrants as assets in Maximo. And so that's just a normal database relationship. And so what I've done now is I've extended, in essence, my asset table with the attribution that lives and is mastered in GIS. Once I'm done with all that registration process, I would then delete the temporary table that I've made and replace it with a database synonym, which really ends up just being a pointer from the Maximo database back to the table that lives in the GIS database. Okay, so now if I'm a Maximo user, I come in through the front end and I want to query some information, and I want to query on an attribute that lives in my water main table in GIS. I can do that from the Maximo application. Maximo will look in the Maximo database, find the synonym, jump across the database link, find the information in the GIS database, and then bring that all the way back to my user interface for my user. So that's all the database side. Then the other data stream that comes across is a typical GIS map service. There's nothing super special about this. ESRI uses map services to publish GIS data out to lots of different applications for consumption. And so this is just another standard map service. If I want to have a web map, if I want to have some other application, GIS knows how to handle these map services. But what happens then in Spatial is that Maximo Spatial will consume this map service, and then inside Maximo will actually tie that the graphics and the geometry back to the database information that's coming across through the database link. Okay? All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about using Spatial, and in just a minute I'm going to flip over and just show you some of the basic functions on how Spatial operates. So real quick, just where to find Spatial in Maximo. There's a couple of different places. The two places that a user interacts with it the most are your contextual menus in Maximo. Everybody's familiar with the select value and the drill downs and the go to when I do a lookup on any of the fields in Maximo. Well, now we've enhanced those lookup values to have a map. So instead of looking up an asset from just a list of values that come out of Maximo, I can actually have a map pop up and go into my map and do my selection in my map and return that value back to Maximo. So that's the first place. The other place that we mentioned before is assets, work orders, service requests, and locations all now have a map tab and also a service address tab, so that when I'm looking at a particular asset, I can flip over to a map and see it on a map. Or if I'm looking at a particular work order, I can flip over and see it on a map. Service addresses is functionality that lets you tie into your customer management systems or your customer information systems and have a list of addresses that are going to be your standard addresses for your customer base. Okay? So let me come out of my presentation for a minute and start. Oh.
Let's go right to right here. And go to that.
Yep. And I'm going to log in.
We're going to do a quick test to make sure everybody can see that. Go ahead and hit that and pop that out.
Okay.
And so I'll just go back to Donnie Martin again. And Donnie, if you can see a Maximo Start Center on your screen, if you'd please raise your hand, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much, Donnie. Okay.
So what I'm going to do, everybody pretty familiar with the Maximo screen, I'm going to come down to Assets, and I've actually made a clone of my asset application. There's not a ton of changes in here, but I have made a few changes that I want to show you some of the capabilities of Maximo Spatial. And what we've done is we've built out a kind of a neighborhood with an electrical data set that we made, and this is all going to be tied back to a GIS system we have here in the office. In case anybody's taking notes, this is Maximo 7.1 with ArcGIS 9.3.1. Okay, so I've got my normal list tab like always. But what you see up here at the top is like I mentioned, I've got a map tab that I didn't have before, and so I can select an asset that I want to look at, and I can come over into my details section just like before. But now what I want to do is I want to come into the map tab and spend a little time showing you what functions we have available in here. So this is our cohesive county and a neighborhood that we built out. So I started a high level view, and I'm going to zoom down. And so here's a neighborhood that we've used quite a bit in the past. So you can start to see my assets, and the blue stars are service requests, and the red stars are work orders. If you could just bear with me 1 minute. Okay, this should be better. There. So I can zoom in, zoom out, pan, and all the other. Excuse me, just a minute. Let me sign out of this and back in. There's a little bit of an issue with Internet Explorer 8 where it doesn't always play nicely with the Java tools in the map. IE7 and IE9 we haven't really ever had any trouble with, but every once in a while IE8 hangs up like this. And let me double check this again. Okay, that's better. So you can see I'm on asset 2119, and it's an overhead power line, and you can see it. Spatial actually highlights it on the screen for me, so I know which asset it is that I'm looking at. I can scroll back and forth between my assets, and it will move between those different assets and center on them for me. So it kind of helps you find where things are. Now remember, this is just a standard map service, so in your agencies you would see whatever symbology or other map information that you have set up. So let me quickly go through what some of the functions are that you have here. Everybody's, I think, pretty familiar with all the standard pan and zoom, previous extent, next extent. I've got a full extent if I want to go back out to where I started, refresh. If you're not familiar with GIS, identify is kind of a standard GIS function, and I can click on this button and then come in and click on the different features I have on the map. And what it's going to do, it's going to reach out to GIS and pull back the attribution for that element that I clicked on. So in this case, it's a transformer bank, and I can see it's 7.2 kilovolts and the feeder that it's on, you know, and all the other information that lives in GIS. Okay. I've got map contents. This lets me turn on and off layers. So if I didn't want to see my work orders and service requests, I only wanted to look at assets, I can turn these on and off, and I can set up transparency for them too. Okay. I've got draw and measure. This is a fairly nice feature. This lets you do markups on the screen, so I can come in and I can, if I'm out in the field, if I've got my field workers that need to inspect something, I can put a note and make a map. Let's make that 10. I can put a note over here. Maybe this is a new subdivision that's gone in, and I need to have someone come out and do an inspection for me on this section, so I can draw a box around that. And then, so I've marked that up, and then what I've got two buttons that let me take that and turn that image into a PDF or into a TIFF image and put it on my attachments in Maximo, or just print it and send it to somebody out in the field with some instructions on what to do. Okay. Now in version 7.1, those markups are not persistent. As soon as I click off of the screen, they'll go away unless I've saved it as a PDF or an image. In 7.5, those have become persistent. Okay. Now, I've got a query function where I can query based on my GIS attributes. I've got an address locator that lets me plug in an address and find it on the map. But the real meat and potatoes of what Spatial does for you is it gives you a new way to search for information in Maximo and find things in Maximo and then interact with that on your other Maximo screens. So let me show you how that works. Here in the middle, I've got this black arrow. This is my selection tools. And if I click that on, I come over here and the text, layer selection, if I click on that, it exposes to me all the different layers that I see on the map. And what I can do here is I can say unselect all, and I can say I'm only interested in transformers. And so now I can come up, and what this is doing is it's telling the map what is and is not selectable. So right now I can only select things that are transformers. I'm going to come up and grab my box, and I'm going to draw a box around this street, and it's going to come back. Here, let me do that again. Let me draw it a little bigger. I'm going to draw a box, and it's going to come back and it's going to select all the transformers on that street, and it's going to show me a little icon that it's selected. Now, where do I manipulate that selection? What do I do with that? Well, up here in the toolbar, there's a button that's called Results. It's a little icon with the picture of folder structure on it, like Windows folders. I can click on that and come down, and I made two selections there, so I'm going to actually say Unify, and it's going to unify that into one result set. And I'm going to expand that out. And now it's showing me all of the transformers that I selected, and I can go through and click on all the different ones in the list, and it will pull up, it'll jump to each one in turn and pull up the information so I can inspect it a little bit further. Now, when I made that second selection, I actually grabbed some transformers on another street. So what I can do, though, is I can find those. So there's one, and I really don't want that one. I can come down in my list, and I can right-click on it and say Remove, and actually take it out of my selection set. So let's get one of those other ones, take him out, and that one, take him out. Okay, so now I have the 5 transformers that I'm actually interested in, and let's say these were all new transformers that got put in, and they're maybe not in operating status yet. So I want to change all of these transformers into an operating status. Or maybe I need to send a worker out to the field to do an inspection on these 5 specific transformers. So I've got it in a result set in my map, but I really need it to be in a result set in Maximo where I can operate on it with my Maximo functions. So what I'm going to do is up in my toolbar, I've got a button that says Update Application List. And what it's going to do, it's going to take these 5 transformers, and I click on that, and it's going to flip me back to my List tab and show me those specific 5 transformers. I didn't have to filter based on any of their Maximo attributes or anything else. They may not be sequential, so there may not be a good way to search for them other than grabbing them on the map. But from this point,
I gotta play back.
I can do my select records, and I can come in and change the status and make them all operating, or I could also come in here and say I want to create a work order with all of those records, with each of those records, or a master work order with a child work order for each of those records. So it's kind of a different way of setting up your work. I'm getting my work orders or my assets for my work orders graphically through the map rather than having to filter through the list tab to do it. Okay? The other thing I want to show you quickly, just a second, we're getting some feedback.
Tom McCurry, if you're not on mute, if you can mute, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The other thing I'll show you here quickly. Let me go back to my list tab. And let me clear my search. Okay. I'm going to come over into the Asset Details tab. What you'll notice, the change I've made and the reason I cloned the asset screen is I've got a section here called GIS Details. And what's important about this is what I've done is I've used the spatial configuration capabilities to display fields on my Maximo screen that are pulling from the GIS tables. So feeder ID, pole inspection date, and light wattage are not fields that live in my Maximo database. These are fields that live in my GIS database. Okay, and what I want to show you is as I scroll through this, so right now I'm on Fuse Bank. Fuse Bank, in this case, doesn't have a feeder ID. Pole inspection date doesn't really apply, and light wattage doesn't apply. So right now these fields are grayed out. And if I wanted to take it a step further, I could use my Maximo 7 conditional user interface and even hide these anytime that I'm on a feature class of Fuse Bank. Okay, but in this case I haven't done that because I wanted to show these. So now if I go to the next record, I'm on a pole, and the pole does have a pole inspection date. So now you see that that data has been populated in there because it actually is pulling, again, directly from the GIS table. Okay. If I go back out to my list tab and I want to search on one of my lights and I click on that, I can come back in and now I see pole inspection data is grayed out, but light wattage is displaying a value. Okay, so this is, you know, where the database link comes in and how that gets displayed on the screen. So now that that data has been brought into Maximo, I can search on it, I can report on it, and I can manipulate my Maximo screens based on data that doesn't even live inside of Maximo. All right. So that's kind of the overview of the functionality. Let me go back to my presentation. And now what we're going to do is talk about some of those configuration capabilities, one of which I kind of just showed you. So this is what we were just talking about, spatial and the Maximo 7 conditional user interface. So you can add fields from GIS tables to the Maximo screen. Now, additionally to that, when you register GIS objects inside of Maximo, it creates SIG options in Maximo security. So I can use my normal conditional interface and my signature options and all the other Maximo things that I'm used to manipulate those fields or allow them just to be viewed or edited or whatever it is that I want to do with them. I also have the ability to allow certain users in certain roles to see layers in Maximo or be able to visualize the layers in the map. Searches, once I've registered, so there's two different things to talk about here. In the map, I can actually do a search by attribute, and this is just a standard GIS search by attribute. So I can go through and I can say, show me all poles over 30 feet, or all the poles that are equal or above 30 feet in height. And that would be data that would live in the GIS, not necessarily in Maximo. But the other thing I can do is I can modify my list tab in my advanced search screen inside of Maximo and allow us to query data based on GIS attributes from the list tab. There's also an IsGIS field that lets me separate my records that have a GIS link versus maybe I'm doing facilities maintenance and I've got fire hydrants in there, fire extinguishers in there that don't have any GIS component. So I can separate those two things out. What I want to talk about here is that out of the box with Spatial, there's also a cron task that keeps the two systems in lockstep. So as you know, as you may or may not know, if you're working in a distribution system, your data is going to be changing. you're going to be adding new assets or new features out in the field. And so what happens is when I've added a new feature, let's say I've got a new subdivision that's gone in and I've had service extended to that new subdivision. So in a typical agency, I'm going to have the people in the field update their records, and that's going to come back to my GIS department. In the GIS department, I'm going to update my as-built maps and create a bunch of new features in my as-built maps, whether it be hydrants or lines or what have you. When I save those and post those back to my default version of GIS, there's a field that is added in the setup process called MX creation state. I'm going to set that field to be 1, and what happens is on the Maximo side there's a cron task that reaches out to GIS and looks for any new fields or any new features that have an MX creation state of 1. When it finds those features with that flag, it's going to now take that information, bring it over to Maximo, and create a new asset for that feature in Maximo. Now it really just kind of stubs it out, so there's still some follow-up work that you would have to do on the Maximo side, but it creates a new asset number and it ties that asset to the GIS record for you. So that in that way it keeps your systems in lockstep so that when new features are added to GIS, you get a corresponding new asset or location in Maximo. Okay. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through a scenario, and this is going to be more service request and work order related. Okay. So I'm going to come into service request, and so what I'm going to do here is this is going to be my electrical environment, and I'm going to pretend I'm a call center taker right now, and one of my customers has called in and they've seen a problem with a down power line near their home. So I'm going to start a new service request. Okay, and with the service address functionality, I can be talking to my customer on the phone and asking them about their problem and where is it that you live again, and they're going to tell me the street that they live on. So I can come in here and filter. And what was your address? Oh, it was 1812. I can just select this and have that pre-populated address come into my service request without having to worry about fat fingering or putting in any typos. Okay. If I wanted to double check that, I could come in and open the map up and try and get a little more contextual information about where we are. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my problem. Yeah. So pull down near homeowner, right? And at this point, I'm not really sure about the asset or anything else, but this is good enough. I'm going to save this. And what I can do is I can now, so Maximo, there's two different ways that I can now write this service address to turn it into a GIS point on the map. So one way is I could come in and open up a map and I could manually place that service address as a point on the map. Okay, so here it's showing me, it's already placed a graphic and showed me where the address is. So I could come in and just put a point here on the map. But in this case, what I want to use is I already know where the address is in this case, so I want to use a function called auto create. And so what I can do is come down in my select action menu, and there's a command that says auto create spatial. And what this is going to do is on work order and service request, it's going to go through an order of operations. So it's going to go through and first look, do I have an asset that has a known geographic location? If so, just create the service request right on top of that asset. If not, then it's going to go look and see, do I have a location that has a geographic location? And if so, then I can put it on top of that location. And then if it doesn't find either of those, I've got a service address, and I know where that address is, so let's just put the service request there. So let's try that. Do I really want to? I'm going to say yep. Okay, and then when I hit save, it's going to write a record back to my GIS table. I have a GIS layer set up called point service request. If I come look at the map now, it should have put a nice little blue star there on my map at that service address. Okay? So now I'm going to go back into select action, and I'm going to use my normal Maximo command. And I'm going to say I want to turn this service request into a work order. So create work order. Do you want to copy the service address over? Yes, I do. So there it is, and work order 1354 has been created. So now let's go take a look at work orders. Okay, 1354. There's my work order. Pull down near homeowner. I'm going to go take a look at the map. There's my service request that I saw before. What I can do, but really the pole that's down isn't in the middle of the person's property. The pole that's down is over here on the corner of the property. So what I'm going to do in this case is now I've figured out, well, I can do a couple of things. First, I figured out what asset it is. So I could come in here and I could say open map for assets, and I can come find that service address there, and I found the asset. So I can do a select on my asset. I want to only select poles, and I want to grab it. It's that pole there. Found it. So now I'm going to say results. Set as current. Say OK. And that's going to take that pole number and put it back in there. I'm going to save that. Now I want to turn this work order into a graphical work order on the map. This time I'm going to do it a little differently. First I'm going to say this needs to be a point work order, and instead of doing the auto create, I'm going to come into my feature class attribute here and I'm going to say open map. And this time what I see is I've got an edit toolbar. And my edit toolbar is going to let me create a feature. I'm going to click on a point, and let's zoom in a little bit tighter on that. Let's go look at this person's property. Well, all right. Let me just make a point. So let's say that the pole's actually laying out here in the street, so I want the work order to show up. Even though the asset is supposed to be here, I'm going to put the work order over here where the pole's actually laying. So I'm going to click there on the map. There you see my point. And I'm going to say OK now. And now I'm going to hit save. And now I'm going to come back and look at my map tab, and I should have a red star right there where I placed that point on the screen. Okay. So now, you see I've done this demo a few times, and so I've got a collection of stuff, work orders and service requests around here. But what you could start doing is once you've built up a little bit of history in your GIS tables, now I can take this back to my GIS desktop and start to analyze for patterns and trends on where work's getting done, possibly change my symbology based on failure analysis or failure codes, or what status work orders are in, things like that. So I can start to see graphical representations of all that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things you could be doing with this, or now that with this architecture in place. So again, the GIS functions introduce new ways to search and select Maximo data, and there's a lot of different things you can do in GIS that are problems that would be very difficult in Maximo. One would be in an electrical context. If I wanted to grab all the poles on an electrical feeder, normally your poles are not an electrical feature, so they don't necessarily have an attribute that says what circuit or feeder that they're on. But what I could do is I could take my conductors And in GIS, I can put a buffer around those of 50 feet and grab all of the poles that are within that buffer. So that's a pretty standard way to search and select in GIS, but not so much in Maximo. But I could use this to grab all the poles on a certain circuit and then write a work order to go out and inspect the poles on an individual circuit. Okay. One of the easiest things for people to start doing is work planning based on what's closest. So I can reduce the number of truck rolls to go out and service a certain area if I can see that, well, I'm going out to a certain address, but I see a PM that's coming due within that same neighborhood on a different asset. So let's just go ahead and take care of it while I'm there. Or I can start to bundle work together and let crews work on things that are in the same proximity. Again, GIS shows trends and relationships based on geography, like we've talked about before. One of the areas that we've seen with other customers is we're going to start to integrate the new asset process. So at a lot of places, you've got the work that comes back from the field, the as-built drawings that come back from the field. Well, in the past, I had to enter that data into GIS and update my maps, and I had to go set up a new asset in Maximo and give it all of its attributes in Maximo. Well, now with the spatial integration, I can unify that process and only have one point of entry for that data. Failure codes by region, I think we've talked about that. Enhanced disaster preparedness and response. So like we mentioned earlier, I can start to bring in other data streams like weather or where population densities are critical areas that I wouldn't have been able to look at before. Some of the things that we've kicked around at Cohesive as some interesting challenges that we would like to see, we would like to build out in Spatial would be potentially modifying Assignment Manager to filter labor by proximity in addition to who's available by time, right? You could also use Maximo to look at asset meters on a map and have it be more interactive. So I can look at a meter on a map, see if it's in the range, and if it's not in range, I can create a work order. Similarly, I could have geographic KPIs, or what we've been talking with some other customers, using GIS to create routes. So like I mentioned with the poles, I could set up the buffer around the poles and turn that pole circuit into a route and then turn that into a PM to go out and do inspections. Okay? And that's really it for what I was going to show technically. I'm going to turn it back over to Matt now to talk about what we can do as far as offerings.
Thanks, Jeremy. And then we wanted to leave a few minutes here for question and answer. So one of the things that Cohesive has done in conjunction with IBM is put together two bundled offerings, as you see up on your screen now. And, you know, implementing Maximo to Spatial or to GIS and using this integration generally is a bit of a crawl, walk, run scenario. There are things that you have to do to compare how you've implemented GIS, how you've implemented Maximo, and how the two come together using this product. So we've to kind of ease the transition into the technology, we've offered two items here. One, which we call a spatial assessment and sandbox, and you can see the deliverables listed: a spatial readiness report, a spatial roadmap for your site, of course some training, and then a sandbox that would include Maximo Spatial, and then a starter kit, if you will, of the product, which is a Maximo server license and 5 Maximo Spatial users. Offering number 2 is really around spatial enablement and what we'll call a limited deployment. And the biggest difference between this offering and the first one I mentioned is that it's really built more with your data. So it's actually taken features out of your GIS, it's using data out of your Maximo system and putting it in an environment so that you can better assess what changes might need to take place on either side, if any, to get the two systems to work together. So those are two bundled offerings that Cohesive has put together, like I say, in conjunction with IBM. And so I think what we want to do now is, well, first off, if you have any more information, my contact information is on the screen. You can take a screenshot of that now, or this is being recorded and you can play it back and grab it there. And of course, we wouldn't be complete if we didn't include our lat long in a GIS presentation. So if you put in that lat long, you'll pop right up to our headquarters. So what I'd like to do now is get back into the, I'll open up my control panel, and then if you do have a question, just please raise your hand. It looks like first question I've got Steve, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute Steve. Steve, if you can hear me, go ahead with your question, please. Okay, Steve, don't hear you. If you can also type that into the chat window. Steve, are you there? Okay, go back to the attendee list. Can't hear Steve, so Steve, see if, let me pull that back open. Steve, if you still have a question, put your hand back up. And if that's the case, what we'll do is any questions that you type in here will come to us in a spreadsheet, and we'll be able to answer it through email or a call back. Again, if there's any questions, go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll unmute you. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any. I'll give that one more minute here. Yep, looks like Steve's stalling. So Steve, I'm going to go ahead and I do see a yield sign by you, so I'm not sure if it's going to let me unmute you, but go ahead, Steve. Stallings, if you have a question, go ahead. Yeah, it looks like as people have joined, they perhaps didn't put in, there's a question from Steve, so let me see. Where's the presentation located? I'll send out a URL to everybody on the presentation that will have a link to the playback. So it'll be on a URL at a Cohesive website. That was the question from Steve. So the next question is, what does GIS cost? And I can answer that question. There are two components to Maximo Spatial. There's a server side that's called an install license, and then there's a user piece. The server install per server is $26,600. This is just IBM US commercial list. The product is probably also on GSA at a bit of a reduced price, and the user fee is $160 per user. Okay, and you do not have to necessarily match up the number of Maximo users you have to Spatial. Rather, it would be the ones that need access to the system is what you would need. So again, $26,600 for the server license, $160 per user in addition to that. The other thing that I'll mention is that there's a product called Maximo for Utilities, and that industry solution from IBM includes the Maximo Spatial product, so you don't have to buy it separate. Steve, if that answered your question, just go ahead and say got it, and then I'll know in the question and answer piece. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Let me poll open list. Look in here, see if there's any other questions. Okay, last call for hands up. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will go ahead and email out to all attendees the URL for this session. You guys have a great weekend and a great holiday coming up. Thank you.